Buongiorno. Good morning. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for coming to join us and spend an hour with us here at the Italian Canadian Exchange, a web series of conversations about Italy and Canada. And today we are talking about cultural identity. And it is a pleasure to have here in studio online, live with us. We have Pal Di Iulio, who is the former CEO of Villa Charities, a huge organization within the GTA that has been serving our seniors and the community at large for decades. And Pal himself has been contributing to our Italian Canadian community for 60 years or so. And he is also has been involved in so many organizations, including the Canadian Multicultural Council. So thank you for being here, Pal.
Just a correction. I don't know that I've been contributing, but I've certainly been experiencing all of those things for all those years.
As he says humbly. And I want to thank Dottoressa Fiorella Foscarini, who's here joining us from Germany at the moment. Dottoressa is a professor at University of Toronto, and she's also the regional advisor for Emilia-Romagna. She has worked as an archivist for the European Central Bank in Frankfurt and has great insights both from an Italian perspective and as well as now resident in Canada. So thank you, Dottoressa, for joining us.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be here.
My name is Sabrina Di Marco. I'm an elected member of Comites. Comites is Comitato di Italiani all'Estero. And I've been happy to contribute or experience, as you say, Signora Iulio, experience the Italian-Canadian growth and history over the years of my life. I also have founded an organization called Making Multiculturalism Work, and have had the pleasure of doing some research and writing and teaching about cross-cultural effectiveness as an adjunct professor at Humber postgrad certificates. So it's going to be exciting to bring together all our experiences with culture, Italian-Canadian culture, Canadian culture, and Italian culture, and explore some facets of it, looking at past, present, and future, and from the inside and out. So let's just start something, a general perspective. Culture is so important to us. I think we would all agree. È molto importante per tutti noi la cultura. So maybe each of you could speak a little bit to how you think that culture is relevant in our lives, both from a Canadian perspective and from an Italian perspective. And feel free, please, to speak in Italian or English whenever you feel.
Well, since I'm the oldest, I'll start. I think when we talk about culture, we have to start with kind of agriculture, because after agriculture comes culture. And it's important because for those of us who are of immigrant experience living in Toronto, the first things we remember about our own culture are, of course, are what we learned on the lap of our mothers, the milk we drank from our mothers, and what we ate around the table. And we didn't discover the bigger culture, the different cultures, ultimately until we went to elementary school. And even then, maybe we had only one language. Some of us only had the dialect that we were taught or we learned. And of course, some of us spoke a combination of Italian and the dialect. And then, of course, we added to that the English language. So whatever we mean by culture, if we start from that type of beginning, we'll have a better understanding when we get to the different, or perhaps some people would call higher forms of culture.
Thank you, Pal. Yes, Signor Iulio. And Dottoressa?
Sì. Chiamami Fiorella per piacere. Ok. Dunque, Io sono un'immigrata in Canada di recente acquisizione, nel senso che è solo dal 2010 che sono a Toronto. Nel 2004 ho fatto un PhD a Vancouver, quindi ho iniziato a conoscere la cultura canadese nel 2004, ma diciamo per gran parte della mia vita, la maggior parte finora della mia vita, sono stata radicata in Italia e poi per una decina d'anni in Germania. Quindi, diciamo, non ho questa esperienza profonda di sradicamento in qualche modo, essendo anche una immigrata privilegiata, perché sono andata all'estero senza necessità, ma proprio per il mio desiderio di studiare, di fare esperienze nuove, trovare lavori più diciamo soddisfacenti. Quindi parlo da un punto di vista di una immigrazione recente, diciamo, e di tipo diverso, forse da quella legata all'agricoltura di cui parlava Pal. Sono sempre stata in contesti molto urbani, urbanizzati. Dal mio punto di vista il concetto di cultura, ma anche il concetto di identità, sono cioè concetti molto stratificati, ci sono tanti livelli di cultura. Parte della mia cultura è quello che faccio. Sono archivista, insegno archivistica, quindi questo mondo degli archivi, della storia, in qualche modo shaped my culture. Non so perché stavo parlando italiano. I'm sorry. I want you to do this in English. Anyway, so it's a concept that is layered and it evolves over time. It's not a static concept. Both culture and identity, and cultural identity together is really something that is always in becoming, always changing. This is my idea of culture and of identity.
Well, I agree with that, but whereas Fiorella, you came to Canada as an adult, which means that you were solidly formed intellectually and physically, I gather, in Bologna, nice place to be formed, and I've been to Bologna.
Yes.
Those of us who were of a different generation, those of us who came with la valigia con lo spago, la valigia di cartone, anziché quella magari quella che si usano oggi di Gucci, Pucci e Fiorucci, no, con rispetto,
sì, sì.
è molto differente. Infatti, da ragazzo, io, se posso parlare personalmente, forse della mia generazione, che siamo arrivati qui da 5, 6, 8, 10 anni, ogni giorno c'era, we needed to negotiate our own identity vis-a-vis what we found in school at the elementary level, what we found on the street, and what we found back at home. And there was a constant prodding of who am I? Sono canadese, sono italo-canadese, sono italiano. C'è gente che durante questo periodo di growth ha scelto di essere più italiano, più canadese, gente che ha dimenticato oppure magari voleva dimenticare di essere italiano, quindi i nomi magari si sono cambiati da Francesco a Frank, da Luigi a Lou. E mentre io, forse per bello o sbaglio grande del mio nome, mi chiamo Palmacchio di Iulio, che anche in italiano sembra da dove sei? Chi sei? Da dove vieni? Quindi anche il mio nome stesso mi ha chiesto quasi giornalmente di dire chi sono. Arrivato qui nel 1956, dopo 3 o 4 anni di questo Palmacchio, ho detto, guarda, tutti gli insegnanti mi volevano chiamare Paul o Paolo, magari Pablo, ma forse. Ho detto no, io mi chiamo Palmacchio, o mi chiamate Palmacchio, oppure mi sono autobattezzato, adesso si direbbe I branded myself Pal. Quindi forse per me questo è più un caso, it's a specific personality trait based on my name, but for me, every day was both rewarding and a battle to keep the name and identify myself, where you come from, who are you, I don't understand.
Yeah.
Something which at a certain age you lose, especially if you already speak, you're mature, or you speak the language, and I'm sure you speak more than one language. In my case, of course, I didn't really speak Italian yet, and I didn't speak English yet. So it was every day negotiations, bartering with, depending on the people in my class, depending on the people in my street, and depending sometimes on whether these people were neutral, friendly, or sometimes not neutral, not friendly, because that certainly was a case back in the 50s for the Italians, when we were seen, not me personally, but as a group, we were seen through the American lens of number one word in America, pizza or spaghetti. The next word is probably mafia. You know, where I come from, the mafia never came to Molise, at least that I was aware of. And therefore, trying to identify what I saw on TV occasionally in films or movie shows, and my reality with my humble parents and my paesani, again, was one of those learning experiences of life that you go along, and you try to make up your own story to protect yourself and to combat. For example, I remember people did ask me, "Are you a member of the mafia?" And eventually, this is at a young age, as a young teenager, and I remember telling this girl, I said, "No, I am not a member of the Mothers and Fathers Italian Association, the PTA group, Parent Teachers Association." Again, these were ways to combat the implied or even in goodwill, sort of partly discrimination, partly all those things go with trying to make yourself at home in a new society.
You're absolutely right, Signor Iulio. The things that
No,
you
call me
brought
Signor
up.
Iulio. That's my father.
Ok, pal. Sì, ma questo fa parte della cultura per me, right? That I took up as a second generation. My dad who immigrated here, my parents who immigrated here. So as a second generation here, was something that we maintain. In a forum such as this, I'm not going to assume to just call you by your first name, you see? But if you give me the permission, both of you, thank you kindly. Please do call me Sabrina too. So we've really touched on the immigrant experience, right? Both different contexts of immigration, because I can bring forth that as the children of that generation, we were born here, but we too went at school. We went through these things. I remember in kindergarten, they put me in the corner because I only spoke Italian. I mean, of the few words I knew in kindergarten, because I spent nearly a year with my nonni in Francavilla. I came back and I didn't speak English. So in, now they would probably treat it differently with the different learning mechanisms. But back then, they punished me like I was being bad. They put me in the corner. So we too negotiated what elements of the reality around us that we would embrace and have to deal with, and what was different from our community or at home. And as you say, I grew up in a community that was very Italo-Canadese, so there was a different level of acceptance. But then when you step outside of that community, you are met with some resistance sometimes, and you have to figure out how to negotiate all that. So talking about the immigrant experience, I'm sure we're going to explore that further, but I was curious because both of you have experience in Italy, and mine is just visiting. Um, what would you say is the relevance of culture from an Italian context? what does culture mean in an Italian's life in Italy?
So I will start maybe going back to my childhood time when I grew up and I went to school in a completely Italian environment. So I didn't have a single schoolmate or neighbor that was not from Bologna or the nearby towns, right? So very different from the way in which today children in Bologna grew up. I can tell you that my nephew Matteo, who is 12, he is at the Scuola Media. He has only 5 schoolmates who were born in the area where he lives, which is Bazzano, so close to Bologna. And he has a lot of friends who just came to Italy from other countries. So he's learning to be multicultural in a very natural way, with some difficulties. It's not always easy, but like in my case, it was a completely safe Italian traditional environment. And I find the way in which I used to make friends and I shaped myself as an individual to be quite different from what I see in Canada. As an adult, making friends is not that easy, right? You have colleagues, you have neighbors, but it's not the same. So what I appreciate of the Italian experience is the warmth feeling, the environment that doesn't ask you why you do things in this way. So it's just you are a bit different, right? Because changing countries, moving around changes yourself. So my friends sometimes don't understand things that I say. They don't share my views, but there is a kind of warmth or like a way of not judging as an Italian, right? If I were from a different country, I'm not sure I would not be judged. But I find that, I don't know, I think my identity has changed a lot by moving through different countries and meeting with different people. But still, when I go back to Italy, I immediately find the true self, what I think I'm really.
Did you say the true south?
The true self.
Self.
Ho capito sud, ho
Her,
detto
her,
no,
her true
Bologna
essence.
non è
No,
nel
no,
sud.
no, la
No,
mia
not the-
essenza,
Okay.
la mia verità.
Okay.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Fiorella, if I can comment,
Yeah.
in fact, your nephew, Matteo, which is my middle name, thank you very much,
Okay.
it seems to be having the experience I had in 56 to 64 here in Toronto. All of my schoolmates were of Polish, Ukrainian, Irish, Catholic origin, and of course Italians, whereas most of the teachers were Anglo-Catholic Irish teachers. But in those days, the fights that we had at school were not amongst ourselves. I went to a Catholic school, St. Anthony's in Toronto, a very immigrant receiving area at that time, and different immigrants today. But in those days, the fights we had were with something called Dovercourt Public School up the street, because that was non-denominational, which for Italians meant protestanti. And they did not like the Catholics. Maybe they didn't like Catholic Italians, but somehow we ended up fighting with not the girl, the boys from on that basis. Today, the fights may be, I don't know, Muslim or Hindu versus other for other reasons. In those days, it was culture, and we all generally looked alike. That in fact, we were white, and I didn't meet my first colored person in my own school until probably the early 1960s. Of course, today, that's a totally different reality here in Toronto. And I know, and probably in Bologna as well.
Yes.
Do you think that there was anything in the school system that made you feel as the other? Or do you think the school system forced you to strengthen your heritage, or did it squash your heritage?
I can, if it's directed towards me, I can answer by saying
Yes.
it probably reinforced my heritage for two reasons. But it didn't do the same for everyone, because some people were crushed by the differences, and therefore reacted by, I suggested just an example, by changing their names. In
Right.
my
My dad
case,
did that. My dad was Giovanni and changed his name to John. He was
yeah,
hoping for work in the municipality of Toronto, and they wouldn't look at his resume as a
yeah, it
Giovanni.
wasn't unusual to do that. It just, what do you do with a name like Palmacchio? So I guess I did the same thing by shortening it to Pal. I gather some people must have thought that I was Hungarian, because I understand that Pal is Paul in Hungarian. And there were a lot of immigrants from Hungary in '56 durante la rivoluzione. One of my first things that I remember doing when I went back to Italy for 6 months, and I came back and I learned a bit of, diciamo, Italiano. This was back in 1960. When I came back, I went to the same school at a different grade, and I found out that one of the boys, Tom Radanovic, it was a Slavic name. He was probably from the polar region, the Fiume Trieste region. He spoke Italian, but he didn't have an Italian looking, quote unquote, last name. I did not know at that time why or why not. All I knew, I was jealous. How can you get a boy called Tom Rodanovic to be the interpreter for these new children? And children were arriving from Sora, Lazio, Molise, Abruzzo, Calabria, Sicily every day. So
was he Italian? Did he grow up Italian?
Well, he must have, because I'll tell you, he spoke better Italian than I ever did. But for whatever reason, I wanted to be the number one Italian. I wanted to be the interpreter. Now, whether that's my ego or whether my jealousy, I confess to both sins. But I do remember that it was, the fact that I felt that I had been picked on, or perhaps, quote unquote, discriminated. I wanted to help these new people who were coming in, and I thought I should be the one that's the interpreter. There was no official interpreter, but me la cavavo, diciamo. And I wanted to be it, and how could they use Tom? And then we became good friends. But I know that initially there was this, ma questo non è italiano, perché?
Well, you bring up a good point, which is what who determines what somebody's culture is. I'm making multiculturalism work, the talks I do and the workshops I do and things like that. The whole point is to take the time to understand our own cultural identity based on our experiences, because we're not just a checkbox, right? If you check, okay, I'm Italian citizen, I'm going to say I'm Italian, but I'm Canadian. But not just that, I speak French, like, because I'm Canadian, and I've traveled here and I've traveled there, and so we've all been influenced by so many different things. So the whole process that we take a group through is to reflect and use tools to identify what their own cultural identity is. Because I find that so much comes from the outside, somebody else telling us what our identity is.
Reflecting on this, I think that when I moved first outside of Italy, and it was in 2000, to go to Germany, I felt really European. I didn't call myself, or I didn't think at myself as an Italian working for the European Central Bank. I was really European, surrounded by people from all over Europe, talking in English to each other. I forgot about my Italian, let's say, essence. But then when I moved to Canada, and I'm one of the few Italian professors I know in my department, the people that I meet regularly, there is only one other Italian at the moment. I feel more Italian now, now that I am in a context that is not European, and that somehow also the subject I teach, so archival studies, that has a very long tradition in Italy, makes my Italian identity somehow more relevant to what I do, more respectable even, right? Because I don't have this, let's say, I don't come with this prejudice that unfortunately was attached to many Italians that migrated in the past, right? I bring the Italian archival culture, and this shapes also my relationship with my colleagues, and I know things that they don't know, and I'm doing now projects on translation and language because I can move between languages while most of my colleagues only speak English or English and French. And so it's really a plus for me now, and I'm proud. I look at my Italian knowledge in a way that gives me a sense of accomplishment.
I'll add to that. I'm not an archivist, but I can tell you that indirectly, I guess I went through the same process. When eventually I ended up in high school, private Catholic school, St. Michael's College in Toronto, which I'm sure is known to Sabrina. I met a number of other young men. It was only for boys, more or less such as myself, in terms of mostly from central southern Italy, but had been in Canada for 5, 10 years, and we bonded. And one of the first things we did, we formed an Italian club, but not just for pizza. Not just for pizza. We wanted, as an Italian club, we put pressure on the school administration to offer classes or a course in Italian at various languages, at various degrees, because in those days, back in the middle 60s, the predominant languages that were taught in school outside of English were French, of course, were bilingual, and the other one was German, Latin, and Greek. And so after 3 or 4 years, we were successful in adding Italian, talking about culture. So that was our little contribution to our own identity, I think. But we did another thing.
Substantial.
We did another thing, because culture can be culture or can be cultural. We did not play hockey because we didn't have skates, or they were too expensive, and we did not know how to skate. We did not want to play American football because most of us were skinny kids from the suburbs, and we weren't big enough or possibly good enough to play big time football. And we said, we want culture, football. We went to the Irish priests, and they thought we were talking about Gaelic Irish football with the oval ball. And we said, no, we want, soccer. That's the American word for football. Eventually, after about 2.5 years of this, we got our own soccer team. So I guess this is part of taking your culture and fare un innesto nella cultura differente canadese at high school that in my own little lifetime and that of my friends, because I'm not saying I did this. It was a group of us that, in fact, our first soccer team, I think, was 9 Italians, 1 Croatian, 1 Irishman, and one Goan from England coming to Canada. So it was, in a sense, Italian / multicultural.
That's amazing. And I'm gonna ask you a question to follow up with that. But first, I want to share with you that this part of this conversation, the last little bit, has kind of created a revelation in my own identity. And I recognize that I am so engaged in the community, the Italian Canadian community, partially because I grew up in Woodbridge and because the community in Toronto is so active, and because of my parents. Dicono che la cultura è tramandato tra la lingua, anche tra le mamme. My mother's from Dominica in the Caribbean, but she's also been the active voice in pushing me, well, both of my parents, pushing me to go to Italian school and to embrace both aspects of my culture, which is its full entity. But what we were just talking about when you're in Europe with Germans and when you were on your soccer team with your at school SA Mikes with different people, that's the differences that actually sometimes strengthen our cultural identity. So I think I'm realizing just from this conversation that the differences within me culturally from my parents actually make me stronger, feeling stronger, more connected to the two cultures from which I come.
Well, I want to go a step further and get very personal. Eventually finished high school, finished university, went to work. I married someone whose name is Maria Grazia.
Okay.
Labriciosa from Penne Pescara.
Oh, Pescara. Forza Abruzzo.
I've been to your town and I know your parents. We have 3 children. So now comes the big test. Do we call the children after the grandfather, the grandmother, on which side? We decided in our own way to preserve, quote unquote, culture. And the 3 children's names are Stefania, Davide, and Dante, che Dante attualmente vive a Parma.
Oh.
See that? Wow.
And Davide attualmente vive a Miami. Siamo rimasti, meno male, con l'unica figlia qui vicino a North York in Toronto.
Lucky.
Wonderful.
Hal, can you? Okay, let's start. I have a couple questions I want to make sure we get in. So can you elaborate just a quick summary of the evolution of the community, the Italian Canadian community?
Well, yes, the
You have
evolution
to gloss over it because of
sì, no, che siamo arrivati qui, io con mio padre che ha fatto la guerra come tanti altri, non c'era lavoro in Italia, non avevano opportunità, erano tanti figli, hanno deciso di andare altrove, Argentina, Australia, America, che non ci voleva a quei tempi, siamo venuti a Toronto. Dopo 5-10 anni di sofferenza, a little bit of discrimination, lavoro duro, hanno comprato la casa, hanno mandato i figli a scuola, sono passati 20 anni e poi non sono più tornati nella bella Italia perché adesso avevano i figli qui, l'ipoteca con la banca, era di contribuire alla cultura, al political culture, e quindi ci siamo integrati. Adesso veniamo non visti come quote unquote migrants or immigrants, but partly because we are white, and therefore I'm often confused to be Jewish or Hungarian or something else. But we are, and I'll quote and I'll finish, former Prime Minister Mulroney, what 15-20 years ago said, one generation of Italian Canadians built Toronto, the next generation owns it.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you so much for sharing that. And do you think, well, let's move on to Fiorella. Can you speak a little bit about preserving culture nowadays in modern Italy? So there's a lot of diversity. I mean, there's always been diversity. We're a
Yeah.
diverse world, but it's more visible and more integrated. Can you talk about the integrating diversity, preserving diversity in Italy, in modern Italy?
Yeah, so you started by saying preserving culture and then preserving diversity. I like more
Excuse me.
preserving diversity than preserving culture.
No,
because
I meant
culture,
preserving culture. I meant preserving culture. Sorry.
yeah, but I like the idea of preserving culture as a composite of diverse cultures. So culture is not a monolith, and the Italian today is anyone who speaks the language, loves Italy, and shows that he or she cares about the.
Oh, you're muted. Fiorella, you're muted. There we go.
I didn't mute myself, but someone didn't like what I was saying.
No, I don't think we're being censored here. No.
Think that we,
Please repeat.
I mean, I don't want to make a political speech now, but I'm a bit concerned about the way in which the Italianità is discussed in Italy nowadays, when it is not easy for people who were coming from other countries and grew up in Italy, went to school in Italy, are fluent in Italian. And for these people, sometimes it's very hard the way to get the citizenship and become Italians because of the color of their skin, because I think what I see from the way in which the political discourse is evolving, there is this sense that we have to defend the Italian, the pure Italian. I'm no longer a pure Italian. Every time I go back, as I said, my friends tell me, why do you like pizza with ananas? I like it. I know it's a scandal,
Oh,
but I like it. And
okay.
and so I bring something back to my own culture that is shocking for them, but still I'm Italian. And so I think we can just be glad, happy that there are people from different parts of the world that want to find their home in Italy, because they can only enrich our culture and continue certain traditions. Maybe other traditions will disappear, as it happened in the past, right? I don't like the idea of conserving an immobile and almost artificial identity.
Vorrebbero conservare sotto aceto nella
Exactly,
cultura
sotto
italiana.
aceto.
It's impossible, the continuous movement of people, ideas, especially with what we're doing today. Look, I'm talking to a screen, I'm talking to Germany, I'm talking 400 yards away, and God knows how many people are listening.
Mm-hmm.
It's a different world, and we live in the world, and Toronto is the world, the meeting place.
Yeah, I'm happy that we see things in a similar way, because it's a difficult time, right, in Europe, as you have seen from the elections, the European elections. So the discussion about identity is very high now in the agenda of the new political parties, right parties that are taking over in many countries, and it becomes a very closed discussion. I think that we should be open, and identity, the beauty of identity is that it's made of different faces, and language is very important, I find. So I think that preserving the Italian language is important. It's a little language in comparison to others, like, so not many people in the world speak Italian, so it's our duty also to protect it. The language should be protected. But the vast majority of the new Italians want to learn Italian, so this is not a problem.
Grazie Fiorella. Perciò questo che ha fatto Paul e che ha fatto così tanti di questi noi connazionali qui a Toronto e altre parti nel mondo, di unirci e lottare per creare qualcosa, per tramandare la cultura, qualcosa che con un po' più di permanenza, come le classi nelle scuole, le classi di italiano, che sono disponibili ai ragazzi di genitori di italiani come con tutti gli altri, per promuovere l'italianità, la lingua e la cultura, la letteratura. There's different levels of determinants of culture. So this is this is our layer of behavioral and explicit, and il cibo. We see it everywhere, the appreciation and the things that you all did to keep that moving. That's so important. When we want to talk about cultural identity and preserving it, we have to give the resources available to make it preserve. And rather than, I think personally, rather than it being a thing of exclusion, rather support the beauty of it.
Yeah. D'accordo, vi dico una banalità. A Toronto ci sono state tante persone che hanno fatto molto di più di Paul di Iulio per condividere la cultura, la lingua italiana, per proteggere il buon nome della comunità, eccetera, eccetera. E dalle volte uno predica e non succede niente. Nel 1982 11 ragazzi italiani hanno fatto dei gol e hanno vinto il campionato mondiale. È scoppiato a Toronto un party, una festa per 3 giorni, più grande che sia mai esistita qui a Toronto, nel distretto italiano, congiunti con tanta gente che non erano di origine italiana, però che si sono autobattezzati con le bandiere e sono venuti a celebrare assieme. Quindi dalle volte dico io, ma povero Dante, povero Boccaccio, eccetera, eccetera, hanno fatto tanto quello che l'altro, e questi ragazzi hanno fatto il gol e tutti quanti hanno celebrato. E poi da allora è come se era un coming out della comunità, perché sino ad allora la comunità si faceva i cavoli loro, però allo stesso tempo lavoravano, eccetera, quieti, silenziosamente, mentre con quel scoppio di allegria per il mondiale dell'82 tanti hanno scoperto, oddio, qui c'è una grande comunità e ne dobbiamo essere contenti e fieri e dobbiamo continuare a condividere con i nostri vicini di casa che della volta sono di altre origini.
Sì, bello. Makes us stronger. We're growing. I was in a high school the other day and they did a culture day, and so many people came dressed in their nice cultural dress from all over the world, and the Italian kids, all they had, they didn't dress in anything. They had their normal clothes, and they had the bandiera or the Juventus shirt, not Juventus, the Azzurri shirt, right? That's it, all of them. So what you said about coming out for the soccer games for this young generation that are maybe i nipotini dei immigranti, 3rd generation. Yes, they have the food because the nonni, they have the language because the nonni, they have the values because their parents, it's trickled down from their parents and gives it to them. But when they want to visualize it, they choose the soccer because that's what they've lived as the excitement. That's how they identify themselves different from other cultures.
Yeah,
very interesting. I said, why did nobody come dressed as Dante or dressed as a gladiator or something?
Another aspect of culture that maybe is a bit more invisible is in the shoeboxes, for lack of a better word, where people keep photographs, letters, memoirs, diaries. I'm sure that in many Italian Canadian families, you find these treasures. As an archivist, I call them treasures of personal connections with people that were left in Italy or went to other countries, and happy and sad stories. All this is also culture, and I hope that in every family that is not monocultural with many cultures, the parents or grandparents influence somehow the development of the young generation by also showing these stories, by talking about events, little events of their family, showing the sacrifici, all the things they did to be where we are now. So it's also sometimes an effort that the older generation should do to encourage this. And I'm saying this because in my classes at U of T, often I have students with Italian names and surnames, and they don't speak a single word in Italian. And I'm not happy about this. And they tell me that their parents, maybe one of them is Italian or both, and or their grandparents, but still in the family, they speak English. Or they hear Italian, but they never went to Italy, which is shocking to me. Or they are not curious. And so this makes me sad.
Yes, this makes me sad. On the other hand, I think there's many who go.
Yes.
Centro Scuola is very popular now. There's many who take the opportunity, and they're calling them the turismo de radici.
Yes.
So, but you're right. There's both. Those who don't have that curiosity and those who do. Curiosity is a beautiful thing. What do you think the experiences of the immigrants? I guess Fiorella, you'd be closest to that now, but I'm sure you have some experience too, pal. Newer immigrants from Italy that didn't go through that thing that we've lived through, right? From a different generation perspective, pal, yourself and I, but it's the same growth of the community with the same community actors. Those who have come from Italy 10 years ago, 20 years ago even, what do you think, how do you think they're connecting to the history, our history, and to the overall Italian culture in Canada and overall Canadian culture?
Yeah, so going back to my first experience as a migrant when I was in Germany, so we were called the expats, like not the migrants. Expat is like more fancy name, a higher category.
Yes,
exactly.
Definitely. You're an expat when you're professional working abroad. Yes.
Yeah, and somehow we kept distance from the migrant Italian. So I would go to a pizzeria where I was a client, and the pizzaiolo I knew would be coming, from a different story of migration. And I would not really, share much, right? And we, the expats, we created a bubble. I don't have the same experience in Canada. Maybe also because there is a different way of integrating people than the expats of the European Union, working for Europe. Still, what characterizes, I think, the new migrants is the desire to go back. Mostly young people go abroad to have a job opportunity with the idea, I want to go back. It was also my idea. I wanted to return. So there is this longing. There was also in the past, I'm sure. But today you think like, okay, now I'm making career, I will have more opportunities. But what you find when you leave is that it's very hard to go back. It was hard in the past. It's also hard today.
So
Yeah.
going forward, Fiorella and then Paolo, if you could close up with this a statement about how you think going forward we can make the most of our Italian Canadian experience and Italian culture.
Well, I'll start. I think you have to practice what you preach. And I say this because I have I know many people in Toronto. I have many friends, and some, my own children speak from good to excellent Italian, better than yours truly, as well as other languages. And we as a family have prioritized that and education and curiosity. Um, Sometimes I hear people saying, perché il mio nipote non mi parli in italiano? Well, part of the challenge is because you did not speak to him. You did not encourage him to go that particular route. And of course, sometimes we all take the easiest route, the less, um, the fastest and easier route, and that is um, to be swallowed up by whatever culture we're around without being comfortable or in charge of your own essence and culture.
I think that's a great statement. Looking from the careful not to let the outside define our culture and to let the internal to flourish and move us forward. Fiorella?
Yeah, I hope to see more engagement with the history of our migration. So something that is not just an anecdote, like we know that Italians built this and that in Canada, right? Italians are important, yeah, sure, we know.
I don't know if everybody knows, but okay.
Right, but I would like to see exhibitions about
Yeah.
this, books, social media discussions also, right? Today, young people don't read much books
Yeah.
or write history, but they can have Instagram sites, about their family history. So being more proactive and proud of this without showing off, or saying that Italians are better than other countries. So I hope that our sense of Italianità doesn't show only when Italy wins something,
Yes,
hopefully
yes.
tonight.
Which we hope
But-
it does today.
Exactly, hopefully later today. But yeah, so, and maybe also in my position as consultrice per l'Emilia Romagna, I can try to do something with the help of a Marcord, some event where we talk about tagliatelle and this we eat tagliatelle and this great food, but we should also open the shoeboxes and show the beautiful stories of everybody.
Very well said. Beautiful. And I want to thank you both today for being here and for all the work that you do and going forward, how you will continue to champion our Italian experience, our Canadian experience. I want to thank, on behalf of you, I'm going to say, I want to thank our ancestors, our parents, our nonni, our communities. I want to thank them all for all they brought for us to be here today because we didn't come by ourselves. We stand on the shoulders of so many who sacrificed and worked for us. Thank you to our community that's built a strong community here, and I want to see it go forward ahead in the generations. Thank you both so much for coming out today, and Forza Azzurri today.
Forza Francavilla!
Forza Bologna!
Ciao.
Ciao.
Ciao, ciao.
Ciao, arrivederci.
Piacere.
Arrivederci.
Okay, one